While coaching in sport and physical activity environments, there will be times when being able to relax and focus and to have the athlete or participant performing optimally will require that the coach intervene. Therefore, we need to be able to understand some psychological skills training, or PSTs, and we will dedicate this lesson to exploring strategies that are intended to improve performance in athletes and participants. The general focus on mental practice has given way recently to systematically studying the potential uses and effectiveness of imagery in sport and exercise settings. More athletes and exercisers have begun using imagery not only to help their performances but also to make their experiences in sport and physical activity settings just generally more enjoyable. Imagery is actually a form of simulation. It is similar to a real sensory experience, as an example maybe seeing, feeling, or hearing, but the entire experience occurs within the mind. Through imagery, an athlete or player can recreate previous positive experiences or picture new events to prepare the athlete mentally for performance. We all use imagery to recreate experiences. We can also imagine and picture events that have not yet occurred. Imagery can and always should involve as many senses as possible. Even though imagery is referred to as visualization, the kinesthetic, auditory, tactile, and olfactory senses are all potentially important in the process. The kinesthetic sense is particularly important to athletes because it involves the feeling of our body as it moves in different positions. Using more than one sense can help to create more vivid images overall. An athlete would also use the auditory sense to hear the sounds of the game. Recreating emotions or thoughts through imagery can also help control such states as anxiety or even feeling joy or pain from an injury. To see the evidence of imagery's effectiveness, sports psychologists have looked at anecdotal reports, or people's reports of isolated occurrences. But anecdotal reports are also the least scientific. A more scientific approach is the use of case studies in which the researcher closely observes, monitors, and records an individual's behavior over time. More recently, researchers have used multiple baseline case studies and found positive effects of imagery on performance enhancement and other variables such as confidence and coping with anxiety. Scientific experiments in support of imagery also demonstrate the value of imagery in learning and performing motor skills. These studies have been conducted across different levels of ability and in many different sports. Recent findings have also revealed some of the details of imagery use to help practitioners design imagery training programs. The majority of imagery use occurs in practice and competition, with athletes being seen as consistently using imagery more frequently in competition than in training. An athlete or coach can encourage imagery use before, during, and after practice, outside of practice, and before, during, or after competition. To determine why performers or players use imagery, we need to differentiate content from function. Content relates to what a person images, whereas function refers to why the person images a certain way. As a coach, encourage athletes and exercisers to visualize specific goals and goal-oriented behaviors such as winning a particular contest or being congratulated for a good performance. Imagery can help an individual set specific goals and then adhere to the training needed to reach these goals. Imagery also focuses on the performance of specific motor skills. This is the type of imagery most often used in sport and exercise settings. Recent research has further divided imagery functions into strategy development and strategy execution. An individual's imagery relates to four aspects of imaging: images of the surroundings, the positive or negative character of images, the senses involved in imagery, and the perspective, be it internal or external. Imagining surroundings can increase the vividness of the image and make it more realistic. Positive images are more often reported during practice and pre-competition, whereas negative images were most often reported during competitions. Some examples that may contribute to adverse outcomes of imagery use and should be avoided by the coach would include imagery that creates anxiety, or imagery that directs attention to irrelevant factors. Imagery that is not controllable can also lead to failure or mistakes. And lastly, imagery that makes the athlete overconfident can be a negative attribute to imagery. Researchers have found that there are 4 different types of imagery: visual, kinesthetic, auditory, and olfactory. However, visual and kinesthetic are the 2 most commonly used. Athletes take either an internal or external perspective for viewing their imagery. Internal imagery refers to imagery of the execution of a skill from your own vantage point or perspective. In using external imagery, athletes view themselves from the perspective of an outside observer. Regarding performance results, few reliable differences have been established between external and internal imagery. Many people will switch back and forth between internal and external imagery. The important key to imagery appears to be getting a good, clear, controllable image regardless of whether it is from an internal or external source. Some factors will affect the usefulness or effectiveness of imagery. First, know the nature of the task. Secondly, consider the skill level of the performer. Imagery may help novice performers learn cognitive elements relevant to successful performances of skills. Imaging ability is also important. The most powerful factor influencing imagery is the person's ability to make use of imagery. Using imagery as a skill, coaches should use imagery along with physical practice. Imagery needs to be added to one's normal physical routine. To try to understand how imagery works, consider that we can generate information from memory that is essentially the same as an actual experience. But there are some theories that help us describe it a little bit more scientifically. The psychoneuromuscular theory has originated from the ideomotor principle of imagery, where it was proposed that imagery facilitates the learning of motor skills because of the nature of the neuromuscular activity patterns activated during imagery. The symbolic learning theory suggests that imagery may function as a coding system to help people understand and acquire movement patterns. If an individual creates a motor program in the central nervous system, a mental blueprint is formed for successfully completing the movement. This helps an athlete plan for his or her movement patterns in the future. The best theoretical explanation of imagery is the bioinformational theory, and this is based on the assumption that an image is a functionally organized set of propositions stored in the brain, and that a description of an image consists of 2 main types of statements. Stimulus propositions describe specific stimulus features of the scenario to be imagined. Response propositions describe the imager's response to the particular scenario to produce physiological activity. The final mode takes things one step further, which is the triple code model of imagery, and this highlights understanding 3 effects that are essential aspects or parts of imagery. The first part is the image itself. The second part is the somatic or body's response. The act of imagination results in psychophysiological changes in the body. And the third aspect is the meaning of the image. What is the relevance for the athlete? A number of psychological explanations have been put forth to explain the effects of imagery. One notion is the attention arousal set theory, which proposes that imagery functions as a preparatory set that assists in achieving an optimal arousal level. A second idea argues that imagery helps build psychological skills that are critical to performance enhancement. Imagery can also help the performer to focus on positive outcomes. These theories or explanations all assert that imagery can help program an athlete both physically and mentally. And the cognitive, physiological, and psychological components of an activity can be captured through different modalities using imagery. Athletes should be encouraged to use imagery to improve both physical and psychological skills. Uses include ways to improve concentration, and imagery can increase awareness of competitive cues that can contribute to faster decision-making and improved execution. Using imagery can enhance motivation. From a sport or physical activity perspective, seeing oneself being successful has been shown to increase motivation to perform. Imagery can also help to build confidence. Specifically, kinesthetic imagery has been seen to improve sport confidence in some recent studies. The best known use of imagery is for practicing a particular sport skill. Coaches can help athletes to use imagery to detect and correct errors in their routine, motion, or movement patterns. Imagery is also useful for coping with pain and injury. It can help speed up recovery of the injured area and keep skills from deteriorating. Athletes can imagine doing practice drills and thereby help to facilitate recovery. There are two keys to effective imagery: vividness and controllability. Good imagers use all of their senses to make images as vivid and detailed as possible. It is important to closely create as much as possible the actual experiences in your mind. Pay attention to environmental detail and experience the emotion and thoughts of the actual competition. This detail will help make the imagined performance more real. Many athletes have difficulty controlling their images and often find themselves repeating their mistakes as they visualize. Whether a person uses an internal or external image appears to be less important than choosing a comfortable style that produces clear, controllable images. To develop an imagery training program, begin by evaluating imagery skill levels within athletes or players. This is an assessment of the current level of imagery skills seen, and individuals will differ in how well they can do it. However, imagery is a mental process and therefore cannot be directly observable. Therefore, the use of imagery questionnaires can also be used to help evaluate various aspects of imagery abilities. After compiling feedback from questionnaires used, coaches can determine areas to incorporate into an athlete's daily training regimen. For the beginner, it's best to practice imagery in a setting with no distractions. As skills develop, people learn to use imagery amid distractions and even in actual competition. Imagery preceded by relaxation is more effective than the use of imagery alone. Before each imagery session, athletes should relax by using deep breathing techniques, progressive relaxation, or some other relaxation procedure to help facilitate imagery flow. Successful athletes are usually intrinsically motivated to practice their skills for months or even years. Similar dedication and motivation are sometimes needed to develop psychological skills. Imagery can improve athletic skills if you work at it systematically. Successful athletes tend to be more intrinsically motivated to practice their skills for months or even years. Similar dedication and motivation may be needed to develop psychological skills for using imagery. Using imagery to recognize and analyze errors can be beneficial for athletes or participants in physical activity, so try using imagery to prepare for the eventuality of making a mistake and effectively coping with the error. Imagery should include both execution and end result of skills. Athletes need to be able to control images so that they see the desired outcome. In consideration of when to use imagery, understand that imagery can be used virtually any time, and one way to schedule imagery systematically is to include it before and after each practice session. Optimal timing of imagery differs from one person to another. Some like to visualize right before the start of a competition, and others prefer doing it an hour or two before. It's important that the imaging fit comfortably into the pre-event routine. After competition, athletes can replay the things they did successfully and get a vivid, controllable image. Using imagery during the off-season is a good opportunity for athletes to stay in practice with their imaging skills. Although recent research has revealed imagery is significantly less performed during this time than during the season. Athletes can use imagery at home or in any other appropriate quiet place, and they should try to set aside 10 minutes so that they do not break their imagery routine. Both coaches and athletes understand the critical role that self-confidence plays in mental success. Research indicates that the factor most consistently distinguishing highly successful athletes from those who are less successful is confidence. Top athletes consistently display a strong belief in themselves and their abilities. But even elite athletes sometimes have self-doubts. Sometimes there is a struggle between feeling self-confident and recognizing weaknesses. We define self-confidence as the belief that you can successfully perform a desired behavior. Self-confidence was originally viewed as both a disposition and a state, but the latest thinking is that sport self-confidence is a social cognitive construct that can be more trait-like or more state-like depending on the temporal frame of the reference used. Self-confidence might be something that you feel today at this moment and therefore might be unstable. Or it might be part of your personality and thus be very stable. Furthermore, recent research has revealed that like most other current personality constructs, self-confidence may be multidimensional, consisting of several aspects. These would include the following: confidence about one's ability to use psychological skills, confidence to use perceptual skills, and confidence in one's physical fitness levels or training levels. Self-confidence is characterized by a high expectancy of success, and confidence arouses positive emotions. When confident, you are more likely to remain calm and relaxed under pressure. Confidence facilitates concentration, and when you feel confident, your mind is free to focus on the task at hand. Confidence will affect goals because confident people tend to set challenging goals and to pursue them actively. The effort that a player expends and how long the individual persists in pursuit of a goal depends largely on confidence. Confidence affects psychological momentum, and coaches refer to momentum shifts as critical determinants of winning and losing. Being able to produce positive momentum or reverse negative momentum is an important asset in sport. Confidence appears to be a critical ingredient in this process. Confidence can also affect performance. Confidence needs to be balanced, and there is an optimal level within each individual. Performance improves as the level of confidence increases up to an optimal point. Since each person has an optimal level of self-confidence, performance problems can arise with either too little or too much confidence. Athletes should strive for an individual optimal confidence level and can sometimes be either overconfident or underconfident. Lack of confidence and self-doubts can undermine performance in sport and physical activity settings. They both create anxiety, break concentration, and cause indecisiveness. And when individuals lack confidence, they may focus more on their shortcomings rather than on their strengths, distracting themselves from concentrating on the task at hand. Overconfident people are actually falsely confident, and their confidence is greater than their abilities warrant. As a general rule, overconfidence is much less of a problem than being underconfident. Often athletes present with overconfidence to please others and to hide actual feelings of self-doubt. It's the coach's job to recognize where in the continuum the athlete or participant or individual lies. A model of sports confidence has 4 components. First, the constructs of sports confidence, including confidence about physical abilities, psychological and perceptual skills, adaptability, and fitness or training levels. Next, sources of sports confidence can be further categorized as focusing on achievement, self-regulation, and social climate. Consequences of sport confidence refer to an athlete's affect, behavior, and cognitions. Factors influencing sport confidence represent the structural and cultural aspects of the sports subculture and affect sport confidence. Self-confidence is the belief that one can successfully perform a desired behavior, and expectations play a critical role in the behavior change process. Keeping expectations high and maintaining confidence under adversity are important not only for athletes and exercisers, but also for coaches. Positive expectations for success have been shown to produce positive effects in many realms of life, including sport. A sequence of events seems to explain the expectation-performance relationship. In step 1, we view the expectations that coaches form, and these are called person cues. Some coaches come to believe that athletes are more likely to possess comparable levels of physical ability within the team. Step 2 involves the coach's expectations and the influence on their behaviors, and usually fit into one of the following categories, which is the frequency and quality of coach-athlete interactions and the quantity and quality of the instruction. With the frequency and quality in mind, the coach will spend maybe more time with high expectation athletes than others, and the coach shows more warmth and positive effects towards this group as well. In the quantity and quality aspect of instruction, the coach may lower his or her expectations, thus establishing a lower standard of performance. Lastly, consider the type and frequency of feedback that a coach provides, and involves a coach providing more reinforcement and praise for high expectation athletes. In step 3, we consider that coaches' behaviors can affect athletes' performances. So low expectation athletes get less playing time, or they exhibit lower levels of self-confidence in the team. Step 4 involves the athlete's performances actually confirming the coach's expectations. Sport and exercise professionals, including coaches, need to be aware of how they form expectations and how their behavior is affected by them. And coaches should determine how they form these expectations and whether their sources of information are reliable indicators of an athlete or player's abilities. Self-efficacy is a situation-specific form of self-confidence, so we'll use these terms interchangeably. Some theories have focused more on one's abilities to overcome obstacles for challenges to successful performance. Self-efficacy theory provides a model to study the effects of self-confidence on sport performance, persistence, and behavior overall in sport and exercise environments. Performance accomplishments provide the most dependable foundation for self-efficacy judgments because they are based on one's mastery experiences. If experiences are generally successful, they will raise the level of self-efficacy. Repeated failures can result in expectations of lower efficacy. Coaches can help participants and players experience the feeling of successful performances by using such tactics as guidance, or by changing situational factors. Coaches often use verbal persuasive techniques to influence behavior. This type of encouragement is important to participants and can help improve self-efficacy. Recent studies and research have shown that emotional states such as happiness, exhilaration, and tranquility are more likely to enhance efficacy judgments than are negative emotional states such as sadness, anxiety, and depression. A number of studies have indicated that higher levels of self-efficacy are associated with superior performance. Performance accomplishments enhance self-efficacy, and then these increased feelings of self-efficacy have a positive effect on subsequent performance. Confidence can be built and can be improved in a variety of ways, through performance, acting confident, thinking confidently, using imagery, or using goal mapping. Successful behavior increases confidence and leads to further successful behavior. Confidence is critical to success. A player is more likely to feel confident about performing a certain skill if he or she can consistently execute it during practice. Therefore, a coach should structure practices to simulate actual performance conditions and encourage athletes to display a confident image during competition. Although it can be difficult for some to do, positive self-talk can result in a more enjoyable and successful athletic experience and also improve performance. Use a goal map for an athlete that contains various types of goals and goal strategies as well as systematic evaluation procedures to assess progress toward the certain goal. Remember that no mental training intervention can ever take the place of the physical skill and conditioning needed to perform in sport, but rigorous training and practice should be integrated with solid mental training. Social climate factors seem to influence confidence and include leadership style, types of goals and their evaluations, as well as social support networks and social feedback sources. Coaches need to consider all of these factors in fostering a positive social climate for sport and to build self-confidence. Coaches, as well as athletes, set goals in sport and exercise activities. Objective goals focus on attaining a specific standard of proficiency for a task, usually within a specified time, whereas subjective goals are general statements of intent. Motivation depends on goal setting, and individuals within sport and exercise environments have been setting goals for a long time, and research shows that goal setting works and can work extremely well. The factors that most consistently enhance the effectiveness of goal setting in sport and physical activity environments include goals of moderate difficulty, both long and short-term goals, and the presence of feedback as well as the specificity of goals and acknowledgement of goals when they are attained. Goal setting is an extremely powerful technique for enhancing performance, but it must be implemented correctly. Some assumptions and guidelines for goals include that all coaches and athletes at one point set some type of goal to enhance performance, and that improving performance can include winning and enjoyment, and these are the most important goals for athletes typically. Additionally, players tend to prefer goals that are moderately difficult. There are some principles to keep in mind when setting goals. First, set goals that are specific and that are moderately difficult but realistic, and long and short-term in duration. Also, set performance and process as well as outcome goals. And develop goal achievement strategies. A coach should foster an individual's goal commitment by providing support and feedback along the way. Coaches and fitness professionals should develop a goal-setting system or plan from the goal-setting principles that have been discussed earlier. The first stage includes preparation and planning, and the time spent preparing for goal-setting process saves hours of work once the program is implemented. This includes assessment and needs. Set goals in diverse areas because athletes and exercisers participate in physical activity for diverse reasons. A coach needs to also identify influences on goal-setting systems and consider the athlete's potential commitment before goals are set. Goals will not be effective unless they are tied to specific and realistic strategies for achieving them. The second stage is the educational and acquisition stage. Schedule formal meetings with athletes or players to introduce goal setting to them and to give them time to think about goals and the processes needed to attain their goals. Try to focus on one goal at a time. The coach should help each individual select just one goal from his or her list. The third stage includes implementation and goal follow-up for evaluation, whereby the coach will assist in the goal evaluation and follow-up within the process. Coaches should also identify appropriate goal evaluation procedures, and this can be the most neglected part of the evaluation stage. This might be, by example, anticipating the busiest time of the year and to estimate how much time you will have available for goal evaluations. Some common problems seen in goal setting include trying to convince students or athletes to set their own goals and failing to set specific goals or setting too many goals too soon. Lastly, failing to adjust goals is also another pitfall or common problem seen in goal setting. The most frequent problem that people in sport and exercise settings have is to fail to set specific goals. The physical fitness professional or coach should monitor initial goals and provide feedback about goal specificity. Novices at setting goals tend to take on too many goals all at once. When too many goals are set at once, they are almost invariably abandoned. Inexperienced goal setters should also set only one goal or maybe two at the most at a time, using the direction of their coach. Coaches should also discuss the need to adjust goals upward and downward as needed. If goals must be lowered because of illness or injury, make the proper adjustments part of a new sequence of goals. Goal perspectives are another important individual difference factor to take into consideration when setting goals, because being more task-oriented or ego-oriented will affect the type of goal, such as process, performance, or outcome. Lastly, a lack of follow-up and evaluation is one of the major factors that we've discussed in the failure of goal-setting programs. It's important for coaches to develop the proper follow-up and evaluation plan for goals, and this is all done in the planning stage. A useful definition of concentration in sport and exercise settings typically contains 4 parts. First, focusing on the relevant cues in the environment, or selective attention. Secondly, maintaining that attentional focus over time. Third would be having the required awareness of the situations that athletes and players often find themselves in within physical activity or sports environments. And lastly, shifting attentional focus when necessary. Maintaining attentional focus for the duration of a competition is also part of concentration. When an environment changes rapidly, attentional focus must be also able to change quickly too. Thinking of past or future events raises irrelevant cues that can often lead to performance errors. Often it is necessary to shift attentional focus during an event, and this flexibility is known as the ability to alter the scope and focus of attention as demanded by the situation. It's also important to be able to relax and to lower the intensity of concentration at times during play. Shifting attention is also necessary and more difficult when time pressures during competition are intense. Major theories attempting to explain the role of attention in performance have used an information processing approach. Current thinking now favors a multiple pools theory approach, which views attention like multiprocessors with attentional capacity seen not as centralized but rather as distributed throughout the nervous system. To connect concentration to optimal performance, we need to involve a broad attention focus, which allows a person to perceive several occurrences simultaneously. Contrast that with the narrow attention focus, which occurs when you respond only to 1 or 2 cues in your sport or physical activity environment. An external attention focus directs attention outward to an object, and an internal attention focus is directed inward to thoughts or feelings among the player or participant. Most coaches and athletes both will recognize and admit that they have problems concentrating for the duration of a competition or throughout the course of a season. Typical problems that athletes have in controlling and maintaining attentional focus include internal distractors and attending to past events, as well as attending to future events, which tend to distract or to take away from concentration and hinder performance. Self-talk is another potential internal distractor and has many potential uses, including breaking bad habits and acquiring new skills. Positive self-talk typically focuses on increasing energy, effort, and positive attitudes. And some recent research has shown that self-talk can be effective in enhancing overall exercise adherence as well. Since being able to maintain a focus on relevant environmental cues is critical for effective performance, controlling arousal levels and setting performance and process goals have been shown to be effective ways in enhancing concentration. This involves using simulations during practice or even cue words which trigger a particular response from the coach toward the athlete. Cue words should also be either instructional or motivational to help focus on the task at hand. Routines can also be used before or during an event to focus attention, reduce anxiety, eliminate distractions, and to enhance confidence. Since distractions are part of all sporting events, coaches can systematically alter practice conditions to allow players the opportunity to practice with a variety of distractions present so that when they are engaged in the activities during competition, they do not tend to hinder or affect performance negatively.